Let those that worship evil's might just know I glow with office light. Here's your look at the McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse, the Gold Label Collection, glow-in-the-dark Green Lantern John Stewart. John Stewart is a former U.S. Marine who uses his military training and discipline to protect Earth and the rest of Space Sector 2814 as a member of the intergalactic peacekeeping force known as the Green Lantern Corps. As Green Lantern, John wields a power ring, which creates a protective shield around him, allows him to fly, and generates hard light energy constructs in the form of anything he imagines. Fueled by willpower, Green Lantern's power ring is one of the mightiest weapons in the universe. This time around, John's ring isn't the only thing that glows. Before we get a closer look at the Gold Label Edition glow-in-the-dark John Stewart, let me go ahead and first grab the tape measure and see how tall he stands. And while I'm doing this as well, the second thing I'd like to do is thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide this sample we're about to have a look at. Glowing John Stewart stands about 6.5 inches in height, or the figure is going to be 17 centimeters tall. Not the first time we've seen this mold, no. In fact, this is, I think, now the third John Stewart we've gotten already, as this is the one that he looks like with the original John Stewart. It looks to be the case that they are using the same mold again, although now being treated to a glow-in-the-dark green paint. One thing it does also grant this figure is that the suit now looks like it's glowing. Some would maybe make the reference to the Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern movie. We don't want to ever make reference to the Green Lantern movie starring Ryan Reynolds. Yes, that did also have glowing suits. Whether you like the look of glowing suits or not, one could certainly say, though, it does bring a little bit more to this John Stewart sculpt, although it does lose a little of the details. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Other figures we can also bring in for comparisons. I always seem to be wanting to bring in this Batman in as of late, but here's what the figures look like with the DC Multiverse Nightfall Batman. Here's a couple of other figures. Here's what he also looks like along with the Blue Beetle, another Gold Label Edition release, and here's also what he looks like with Captain Atom. These recent McFarlane toy releases that have the slip sleeve cover that you have to slide off all seem to be lately treated to these podium display stands. This stand, like the case before when we looked at Swamp Thing, this does also glow in the dark. I'll bring in my black light. Actually, you know what? I've got my black light already right here. Shining the black light across this. I will be cutting the light shortly, though, so you can see how well this does illuminate. But for right now, at least, you can see that the DC logo does shine brightly. It doesn't have any of the additional sort of smearing green that they've added for Swamp Thing. Likely they probably did that deliberately so it would actually look like there was moss all over the base. But the stand itself, the podium stand, seems to be exactly the same. It's hollow on the back, it slots on the top, and then of course you can take yourself the card of John Stewart. And I think we, in fact, gotten this card as well before. This one happens just to say glow-in-the-dark edition, which is a little jarring because, of course, if you're going to be just putting this, not with the figure, but let's say, for example, you want to put this in with your trading card sleeves, it's sort of weird that this one actually has to say glow-in-the-dark edition. But the actual outline of the card, while just, again, grabbing my black light here, does look like it may even illuminate also. So there's also that. If we flip, though, around the back of the card, it does say the Certificate of Authenticity, indicating that this is also P7 out of 3,000. That might be very well artist proof, like a proof 7 out of 3,000. I would imagine normally it would have just said the number out of 3,000, but again, because this was provided, might likely be why it says P7 out of 3,000. Anyways, we're going to go ahead and slide this back in. There's a little slot on either side. We're just going to take the card and slide it down in the middle. Put that to the side. Figure also comes included with, again, a very much more interesting stands than maybe some of the earlier looked at before. I'm just going to bring in an example right now. Don't try to twist my rubber arm to tell me exactly what name of the character I would have had this from. This actually is just a generic DC Multiverse stand, but you can see like it's literally the same stand. This one just happens to have the turn this way. It happens to have the Green Lantern Corps symbol on the top. And again, we'll just bring in the black light, just shining across the front of it. You can see as well that they're using the glow-in-the-dark green paint there as well. I keep this readily available. If any of the time comes where I need to be checking something on the wall, something seems a little suspicious, maybe a spirit is starting to write something obscene on the wall, I need to be able to see what it is. I was kind of keep my black light just on the handy, just to the side here. Speaking of handy, the figure also comes quite handy with a couple of accessories. Oops, I almost dropped it. Comes included with what seems to be a pair of matching swords. A bit of a strange thing to come packaged along with this version of John Stewart, but John Stewart before came included with that minigun, so at least this is something different. Once again, these are using, it seems to be glow in the dark. I don't know why am I moving my hand behind it, but just again to bring in my spirit catching, no, nothing on the walls. just to shine across the front of the plastic, you can see as well that this is going to be glowing. All of this, again, will be more proven when we're going to cut the lights. The swords themselves are okay. I mean, I probably would have used something else, I think, to pack along with Jon Stewart other than swords. It just doesn't seem like something he would do. He's a military guy. I would imagine he'd probably be using something more of the firearm variety, but at least he comes included with swords. I suppose you could, if you wanted to, use the swords for another Green Lantern, but yeah, they just fit into his hands. The plastic on these ones, being that they're glow in the dark, the plastic doesn't seem like it's as, I don't know, it has a different feel to it. It's not a soft plastic. It sort of has the rigidness of usual DC Multiverse figures. But if you have the figure, you'll kind of know it has almost a little bit of a texturing to the plastic itself. But that's what he looks like with, of course, dual sabers in his hands. Seems, again, a bit out of place for Jon Stewart myself, but, I mean, that's just my own personal opinion. Let's, for right now, at least take the swords out of his hands. We'll put them to the side. There is no storage space, by the way, to store the swords, because, of course, he's generating them by his ring, which just happens to be right here, by the way. It's not painted, though, but you can still see that they're using the same hands as the Jon Stewart before. I'm going to talk more about that also in a few seconds. I did also want to draw your attention to the fact that he does have a hole in the back of his body. This normally would have been the place for the original Jon Stewart to have and house that backpack that would have had then the ammunition belt running to the front of his minigun. Because they, of course, use the same figure, it carries also, again, over that same hole that doesn't really serve much of a purpose other than just being a hole on the back of the figure's body. Getting a closer look now at Jon Stewart, in fact, let's just move the podium out of the way just because I didn't want to block the view, and the camera, I'm sure, is probably going to focus on that instead. I really like the look of this head sculpt. I've always been a big fan of this particular Jon Stewart sculpt, and just to bring back in the original Jon Stewart, it doesn't seem to be at all different. I would say, though, like the skin tone seems a tad bit lighter and is a little bit darker also in the lips. Between those two things, I feel like the head sculpt on this one is a little bit better painted than the original Jon Stewart. But that's not faulting at all the original Jon Stewart sculpt. I think the original one was fine as well. But I think like this one, I think the colors work a little bit better on the figure's face. Though on the body, I did say like he loses a little bit of the sharper details, one of which being the fact that if you look at the front of his suit, the sections that he has these lines, not only to mention as well that he has the Jon Stewart, well, the Green Lantern Corps symbol on the front of his chest, seem a little bit more now muted because he's using, of course, the glow-in-the-dark green plastic. The plastic does lose a little bit of the sharper details. You can see a little bit more of it refined here on the original figure release. But at least the black parts of the figure's body, all below the green, seems to be pretty much consistent with what we got before with the other Jon Stewart. One thing I did also want to mention, though, is that the body, this abdomen area, because, of course, like these pieces, these original figures, had sort of like this additional layer of softer plastic that sort of concealed the joint. Sometimes it usually resulted in this gap space that was developing down below here. Now, I haven't done much moving yet of this figure, but it seems like this part of the plastic of his abdomen seems a little bit more fitted to his body. It could also just be the case I haven't really moved as much of the figure around. Maybe the more I move it, it will also start to warp and soften up the plastic. But it seems like all the times I have moved it, it still is pretty fitted to his body. So that's a good thing. He does still already have, I mentioned already, that he does have the ring. The original Green Lantern, Jon Stewart, also would have had the ring on one of his fingers at least, so that's still in the same sculpt, and all the rest of the sculpting of the figure is, again, exactly the same. I personally like the glowing green myself. I mean, obviously we're going to be looking at a lot more of what's glowing about him. All the sections that are green, that look sort of like lime jello, will be the things that are actually going to be glowing and pulsating on the figure. The thing about it, though, is, well, I kind of like the green. I mean, like, the darker green worked really well for just a regular, like, if you were just to have the figures standing on your shelf, not doing much of anything. But if you are having him, saying, in a flight pose, and he's battling some evil doers out in space, the glowing green does bring a little bit more, I feel, to Jon Stewart's sculpting, and it does actually look like he's using the ring rather than having the ring neutrally bayed and not actually charged. So I really like the glowing feature. I think this is a good example. This and actually the earlier looked at Swamp Thing, I think, are prime candidates for why I think they chose smartly choosing, say, Jon Stewart and choosing the Swamp Thing from before for figures that they would make for glowing figures. I think this works perfectly for a glow-in-the-dark figure. Now, of course, we're going to be looking at all the things that are glowing on him. So again, it's going to be this part of his torso. It's going to be the arms, the gloves, and of course the lower boots. Just before we actually do that, though, I did want to show you guys the articulation on the figure. It is going to be exactly the same as the Jon before. The head rotates all the way around. It's on a ball joint. Head looks up fairly high, in fact. So again, if you had yourself a flight stand, which sadly this figure does not come included with, you can have the head looking fairly high up. As well, you can have the head looking down, about, well, pretty low in fact, about there. You can also rock the head back and forth this way. And of course, yeah, you can rotate it all the way around. Shoulders are on hinge joints, so you can bring them beyond the point of 90 degrees. You can do a good jumping jacks, actually, with the way that they've hinged the arms. And it's always the case, they usually have the little sockets inside there. These little cup joints usually are good to then hide the joint that's inside the shoulder. But yeah, the arms rotate all the way around. It's the same on both the sides. Biceps do swivel, of course. There's the double hinge on the elbow, which is a little harder always when you get a figure that has biceps these big. You can actually, yeah, there's a hinge in the elbow, but it's really kind of hard to bend it when you've got a bicep this big. I really wish that was a problem of mine. Arms rotate, the hands rotate all the way around, and they hinge also back and forth. Upper torso is on a ball joint. The lower abdomen area, again, is on that lower ball joint. Now, again, they've hidden this part with this part of the softer plastic. It's kind of actually more like a rubbery skirting that they covered over top of the joint. I honestly wish, though, that they would have just had this still, and this goes back to a point I may have even mentioned when we looked at the original Jon Stewart, that I kind of wish that this was just all one sculpted piece. It doesn't necessarily need, I feel, waist articulation. You already have it here in the upper torso, that if they had to make the sacrifice, because of course they didn't want to break up the sculpt, I'd be fine really if they just had kept this as all one piece, fully intact, all one piece, and then your only articulation available would have been the top of the torso, instead of actually adding, well, maybe even just a little bit of moving that I've done. You can see how that's lifted up, just because, again, it's softer plastic. The legs do split out. That's as far as they're going to go. You can bring the legs, of course, forward and back. It's a mild swivel at the top of the thigh, double hinge on the knee. There's no articulation for the boot because it looks just to be a continuation of the lower calf. But then again, like the feet move up and down this way, you can rock them back and forth this way. And the figure also has toe articulation as well. For a second looking at it, and I think it's just the way that it's outlined, see like the outer area of the plastic seems like it's glowing a little bit brighter. For a second when I was looking at it, especially when I was bending the foot, I thought I may have actually fractured the plastic. But it's not the case. It's just the way that they've actually molded the plastic. There's a pin right here, but there doesn't seem to be a fracture point, doesn't seem to be any stress marks. I think it's just the way they've actually sculpted this particular plastic. Okay, so for actually getting this guy to glow in the dark, what I will then do, of course, is cut the studio lights around us, and we'll see how brightly Jon Stewart actually glows. I know earlier I was using my black light, but sometimes I find it helps to get the most absorbing by using your office lights, for example. Just your regular light bulbs will help to really take and absorb the most amount of concentrated light to help that plastic then glow. I still got, of course, the assistance of my black light here just to shine again across it. The black lights are really good also if I have if I'm reviewing the figures with the lights still turned on. It gets you still the chance to kind of see how everything glows. But if you really want the full effect, the brightest effect, it really does help to have this shining in front of like in a little office light bulb. What was rather also interesting is that if you see it from the front of the chest does glow, but it doesn't glow at like a bright green, for example. It glows almost even like a brightish white yellow. You can see there on the front, it glows obviously on the back, the gloves, and down below here also on the legs as well. Some interesting points to point out also as well is that the points, like the little hinge joints, for example, seem the most concentrated in that glow-in-the-dark plastic. It might have just been the case that they painted the plastic. I'm just going to shine my light in front of it again. They may have actually painted the boots in the glow-in-the-dark paint, but then they may have actually likely used the glow-in-the-dark plastic for the pegs. And that seems to also be the case when we look at the arms as well. You can see like the wrists have more of a glowing plastic than the hands and of course the forearm around it. Another rather interesting notice that I found, at least while shining my light across this, I don't know if the camera's even able to pick this up, but you can see like all these little speckles of paint. I'm sure not intentional. It was likely just the case of the way they painted the figure. Maybe a few little flecks of that glow-in-the-dark paint speckled across some of the black plastic as well. Yeah, when it comes to glow-in-the-dark figures, I think McFarlane was smart to choose both Swamp Thing and a Green Lantern. It didn't have to necessarily be Jon Stewart. We do also have a Hal Jordan, and surprisingly, Hal Jordan really hasn't gotten any other figure release other than the one that was packed along with the Negative Earth version of that Green Lantern. But yeah, when it came to Jon Stewart, we've already, yes, technically gotten this figure, 2 times already before. But with Swamp Thing made the most sense of having a glow-in-the-dark release because, of course, you got sort of that glowing swamp phosphorus glowing on his body. Same could also be said here for Jon Stewart. Like his glowing suit that he has, whether you like the idea of a glowing suit or not, I think works really well for a glow-in-the-dark figure. Part of me does, though, wish that this figure could have instead been in Hal Jordan. And I don't know the real reason why McFarlane still chooses to do another Jon Stewart when we already have the two before, and didn't opt to have not a glow-in-the-dark version of Hal Jordan. Whether that be something that we will still see down the road, at least Jon Stewart here doesn't just simply have glow-in-the-dark paint, replacing the regular green that he had before. He also comes included with two new energy constructs, two of which I don't think I've seen yet before with other figure releases. So those are brand new. They get packaged along with Jon Stewart. He also gets, of course, that podium card display stand, whether you like that or not. And he also gets himself a unique regular stand, something that I really wish that could be carried over to other, DC Multiverse figures that aren't even necessarily gold label editions. But what do you guys think of glow-in-the-dark Jon Stewart? Is this a figure you could see yourselves picking up? And what other glow-in-the-dark characters would you really like to see McFarlane release as future gold label editions? Let me know down below in the comment section. Once again, a big thank you to the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide the sample of the gold label edition, glow-in-the-dark, Green Lantern Corps, Jon Stewart. Don't even know how I'm going to be able to fit that all in the title. If you guys enjoyed this video, why not hit it with a like? If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing and you certainly do want to stick around for more, if you haven't already done so, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below and as well turn on the bell notification. Just a little birdie sitting on your shoulder, by the way, is whispering in your ear, there are more videos coming your way of DC Multiverse. So if that's the kind of thing, I didn't realize birds could speak in English, but if that's the kind of thing you'd like to come back to this channel for on a regular basis, do come back to this channel on a regular basis because there's more content coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.